The statement, "Man shall not live by bread alone," is not a denial of human needs, but a revelation of where life truly originates. Bread represents everything the world tells us we must rely upon: money, status, possessions, recognition. These things appear essential, yet they are only effects, not causes. To live by bread alone is to believe that life is sustained by what we can touch, count, or control. True abundance begins when this belief quietly dissolves. Life is sustained by an unseen source, ever-present, inexhaustible, and intelligent. When consciousness is anchored in this awareness, fear loses its authority. Lack is not corrected by acquiring more, but by realizing that supply does not begin in form. The moment one stops asking, "How will I get enough?" and begins to rest in the certainty that life itself is already complete, abundance starts to unfold without strain. The hunger most people feel is not for bread, but for meaning, peace, and assurance. No amount of material gain can satisfy a soul that has forgotten its source. But when the inner life is nourished, through stillness, awareness, and trust, outer needs arrange themselves naturally. Opportunities appear, resources flow, and support comes from unexpected directions, not through force but through alignment. True abundance is not something to be pursued, it is something to be recognized. When we cease striving and begin abiding in the awareness of an infinite presence within, life responds effortlessly. Then bread is added, not as a struggle but as a byproduct of a life rooted in spiritual truth. True abundance is rooted in spiritual consciousness, not material accumulation, because accumulation addresses symptoms while consciousness addresses cause. Most people are taught, directly or indirectly, that safety, joy, and fulfillment come from what they own or achieve. As a result, life becomes a continuous effort to gather, protect, and increase material forms. Yet no matter how much is acquired, a subtle insecurity often remains, because material things are unstable by nature. They can be lost, changed, or rendered meaningless by circumstances beyond control. When abundance is sought in accumulation, it becomes conditional and fragile, always dependent on external factors. Spiritual consciousness operates on a different level. It begins with the realization that life itself is sustained by an infinite intelligence, not by human effort alone. In this awareness, abundance is understood as a quality of being, not a quantity of possessions. One does not become abundant by owning more, but by recognizing the presence of an inexhaustible source within and around them. This recognition shifts the inner state from fear to trust, from striving to receptivity. The mind no longer clings anxiously to outcomes, because it rests in the certainty that life knows how to express its own fullness. When consciousness changes, experience follows. This is not mystical escapism, but a practical law of life. A mind rooted in lack interprets the world through scarcity even in times of plenty. A mind rooted in spiritual awareness perceives opportunity, guidance, and flow, even in uncertain conditions. Material supply responds to this inner alignment, not because consciousness manipulates reality, but because it removes resistance to what is already available. Accumulation demands constant effort, comparison, and defense. Spiritual consciousness requires surrender, listening, and trust. In that surrender, action becomes inspired rather than forced. Work becomes an expression of purpose rather than a desperate means of survival. What is needed appears in appropriate form and measure, not as excess driven by fear, but as sufficiency guided by wisdom. Abundance, then, is no longer something to chase, but something that unfolds naturally as consciousness aligns with its true source. Bread symbolizes all external forms of supply because it represents everything the human mind identifies as necessary for survival and comfort. It stands for money, food, shelter, security, recognition, and even relationships when they are viewed as sources rather than expressions of life. These things appear to sustain us, yet they are outcomes, not origins. When life is reduced to dependence on external forms, existence becomes fragile, governed by fear of loss and constant calculation. The belief that supply lives in form gives form a power it does not truly possess. External supply is always secondary because it has no intelligence of its own. Money cannot decide when to come, food cannot arrange its own provision, and opportunities do not appear through personal will alone. They arrive through conditions shaped by consciousness. When attention is fixed on bread as the source, the mind becomes anxious and controlling, attempting to secure the future through accumulation. This effort often creates tension, competition, and exhaustion, because it asks finite means to perform an infinite function. The deeper truth is that supply originates in an unseen law of life that continuously expresses itself in visible ways. Bread appears as a result of alignment with this law, not as its replacement. When one understands this, dependence subtly shifts. Instead of clinging to forms, there is a resting in the source that produces forms. This inner shift loosens fear, because loss of form no longer means loss of life. New expressions of supply are always possible when consciousness remains open and trusting. Living by bread alone narrows perception. It trains the mind to see only what is measurable and immediate, while ignoring guidance, intuition, and inner direction. Yet it is often through unseen impulses that the right decisions are made, the right connections occur, and the right opportunities unfold. When bread is no longer worshipped as the cause, it takes its proper place as an effect, useful but not central. This understanding does not reject the material world, it redeems it. Bread is no longer chased or feared but received. External supply becomes a servant rather than a master. Life is then lived from the inside out, where inner awareness governs outer experience. In that order, forms come and go without disturbing peace, because they are no longer mistaken for the source of life itself. Dependence on the infinite source dissolves fear, lack, and insecurity, because fear is born from the belief that life is separate, limited, and unsupported. When a person believes they stand alone, responsible for sustaining their own existence through effort and control, anxiety becomes natural. The mind constantly measures, calculates, and anticipates danger, wondering whether there will be enough time, money, health, or opportunity. This state of dependence on personal strength or external systems creates inner tension, because the finite is being asked to guarantee the future. The moment consciousness turns toward an infinite source, something profound shifts. Life is no longer perceived as a personal struggle, but as a movement of an intelligence far greater than individual thought. Dependence does not mean passivity, it means trust rooted in awareness. When one realizes that life has always been sustaining itself, through breath, growth, order, and timing, fear begins to loosen its grip. There is a quiet recognition that the same power that formed existence is present now, actively maintaining it. Lack is not merely the absence of things, it is the sensation of inner emptiness and insufficiency. No amount of external gain can permanently resolve this feeling, because it does not originate in circumstances. Dependence on the infinite source addresses lack at its root by restoring a sense of inner completeness. When consciousness rests in the awareness of an ever-present supply, the feeling of deficiency fades. One no longer feels cut off from life because life is experienced as flowing from within rather than being chased outside. Insecurity thrives on uncertainty about tomorrow. Dependence on the infinite introduces a different certainty, not based on predictions but on presence. There is a knowing that whatever form tomorrow takes, the same source will be there, expressing itself appropriately. This does not eliminate challenges, but it removes the belief that challenges equal abandonment or failure. As fear dissolves, clarity emerges. Decisions become simpler, actions more grounded, and responses less reactive. Life is no longer lived in constant defense mode, but in cooperation with an intelligence that has never failed to sustain its creation. In this awareness, peace is not dependent on conditions, and security is no longer tied to possessions or outcomes. Inner awareness precedes and shapes outer experience because the world we encounter is filtered through consciousness before it takes form as lived reality. Circumstances do not arrive neutral, they are interpreted, responded to, and ultimately shaped by the state of awareness from which we live. When consciousness is restless, fearful, or driven by lack, outer experience reflects confusion, resistance, and struggle. When consciousness is quiet, receptive, and grounded in trust, life responds with greater harmony, clarity, and flow. Inner awareness is the atmosphere in which choices are made. Two people can face identical situations, yet experience entirely different outcomes because they meet life from different inner states. One reacts with tension and control, attempting to force results, while the other responds with attentiveness and patience, allowing insight to emerge. The difference is not in the situation itself, but in the awareness engaging it. This is why lasting change cannot be produced solely by altering external conditions. Without a shift in consciousness, the same patterns simply reappear in new forms. Outer experience follows inner orientation much like a shadow follows a body. It does not lead, it reflects. When awareness is centered in fear, the mind unconsciously seeks evidence to confirm that fear. When awareness is rooted in trust, perception widens, revealing opportunities and solutions that were previously invisible. This does not mean ignoring reality, but seeing it more clearly. Without distortion imposed by anxiety or expectation, inner awareness also governs receptivity. Many people struggle not because supply is absent, but because awareness is too occupied to receive guidance. Noise, constant thinking, and emotional agitation block subtle insight. In stillness, direction arises naturally. Intuition becomes audible. Timing improves, and action aligns more effortlessly with circumstances. What once required strain now unfolds with fewer obstacles, not because life has changed but because awareness has. The outer world is fluid, responsive, and constantly rearranging itself around consciousness. Attempts to control it directly often create resistance, while shifts in inner awareness produce change without force. When one attends first to the quality of awareness, cultivating presence, listening, and trust, outer experience reorganizes accordingly. Life then moves from reaction to response, from struggle to cooperation, reflecting the inner order from which it is lived. When the soul is nourished, material needs are met naturally because life moves toward balance when its deepest level is attended to. Much human striving comes from attempting to satisfy an inner hunger without a means. People seek security, recognition, comfort, and peace through possessions and achievements, yet these efforts often leave a quiet dissatisfaction untouched. This is because the soul does not hunger for things, it hungers for connection, meaning, and alignment with its source. When this hunger is ignored, material pursuit becomes compulsive and exhausting. Nourishing the soul begins with turning inward, not in withdrawal from life, but in awareness of the life already present within. In moments of stillness, sincerity, and openness, the sense of separation begins to soften. One no longer feels driven to prove worth or secure existence through constant effort. This inner settling restores a natural order in which action flows from clarity rather than anxiety. Work becomes an expression of purpose, not a frantic attempt to survive. As inner tension dissolves, the body and mind function more harmoniously. Decisions improve, perception sharpens, and energy is no longer scattered. This state of alignment affects how one engages the world. Opportunities that were previously overlooked become visible. Relationships shift, timing improves. Material needs are met not through manipulation, but through responsiveness to subtle inner guidance. Life begins to feel cooperative rather than resistant. This does not imply that effort disappears, but that effort is guided rather than forced. Actions taken from a nourished inner state tend to be appropriate, efficient, and timely. There is less waste, fewer wrong turns, and less attachment to outcomes. Because fear is no longer driving behavior, there is room for creativity and adaptability. Supply meets demand because demand is no longer distorted by inner emptiness. Material provision responds to inner wholeness because life seeks expression through balance. When the soul is acknowledged, outer life aligns to support that recognition. Needs are met in forms that fit the moment, without excess or deprivation. What arrives feels sufficient, not because it is abundant by comparison, but because it is free of inner hunger. In this state, gratitude arises naturally, and abundance is experienced not as accumulation, but as a quiet, ongoing adequacy woven into daily living. Abundance flows through alignment with divine law, not personal effort, because personal effort alone operates from a limited sense of self. When individuals believe they are the sole authors of their success, life becomes a contest of willpower, strategy, and endurance. Effort is then fueled by pressure and fear, creating cycles of striving and disappointment. Even when success is achieved through this mindset, it often brings exhaustion rather than fulfillment, because it is sustained by tension rather than harmony. Divine law is not a distant rule imposed from outside, it is the intelligent order through which life expresses itself. Every natural process unfolds without strain, guided by an inherent intelligence that knows when, how, and in what form expression should occur. Alignment with this law means recognizing and cooperating with this order rather than attempting to replace it with personal control. When consciousness yields to this deeper guidance, effort does not disappear, but it becomes proportionate and purposeful. Personal effort tends to push, while alignment allows. Pushing assumes resistance, allowing recognizes flow. In alignment, action arises from insight rather than urgency. One moves when moved, speaks when clarity is present, and acts when direction is felt inwardly. This reduces wasted effort and minimizes conflict, because action is synchronized with circumstance. What once required struggle now unfolds with less friction. Not because obstacles vanish, but because movement follows a wiser timing. Abundance expresses itself where there is least resistance. Fear, impatience, and over-assertion create inner blockage. Even when intentions are good, alignment softens these barriers by shifting focus from outcome to awareness. Trust replaces tension and receptivity replaces force. In this state, life responds generously, often in unexpected ways, because it is no longer being directed by narrow personal agendas. This understanding frees individuals from the burden of constant self-reliance. Life is no longer a solitary effort, but a shared movement with an intelligence that has always been active. Abundance is then experienced as a natural circulation rather than a personal achievement. What flows in is received with humility, what flows out is given with ease, and living becomes a participation in a law that sustains without strain. The truth revealed in the words, "Man shall not live by bread alone," is an invitation to reverse the order by which life is usually approached. When bread or any external form is treated as the source, life becomes anxious, effort-driven, and unstable. But when consciousness returns to its true foundation, abundance is no longer something to pursue, defend, or fear losing. It becomes a natural expression of alignment with an unseen but ever-present source. True abundance is not measured by how much is accumulated, but by the quality of awareness from which life is lived. Dependence on the infinite dissolves fear because it restores trust in a sustaining intelligence that has never failed to support its creation. Inner awareness shapes outer experience not by force, but by reflection. When the soul is nourished, outer needs find their proper place and are met without struggle. In this alignment, effort gives way to cooperation, and striving is replaced by clarity. To live beyond bread alone is not to reject the material world, but to place it in right relationship. Bread is added, not as a master, but as a servant. Life then unfolds with balance, sufficiency, and peace, revealing that abundance has always been less about what we acquire and more about what we recognize within.